What's up everyone, and welcome back to more Reddit stories about entitled people, Karens, and all that kind of stuff. Hope you're all doing wonderful. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet for more Reddit content, and let's get into today's stories. Am I the a-hole for boarding the plane and leaving without my wife? I know how this sounds, but hear me out. My wife, 43, and I, male 47, have a daughter, 21, who goes to college out of state. We will call my wife Meg and my daughter Jess. Jess is in her junior year of college. Over the summer, she was employed by her university and was able to stay in the dorms. After summer, she was moving out of the dorms and into her own apartment off campus. Meg and I live in the Pacific Northwest. Jess goes to school on the East Coast. We usually go to visit Jess a couple times throughout the semester, typically parents' weekend and move-out day. She also comes home during the holidays. Let me start by saying that traveling with my wife is not a great experience. I am very type A. I like to have everything organized and make sure that we get where we need to be early, especially when traveling. My wife is the opposite, very go with the flow, and we will get there when we get there. I do my best to meet in the middle, but not when traveling by plane. Last year during Parents' Weekend, Meg and I were going to fly out to see Jess. Our flight was at 10 a.m. Our airport isn't huge, but not a tiny airport either. I told my wife that we need to be at the airport 90 minutes early, and we live about 30 minutes from the airport. This being said, I wanted to leave at the very latest, by 8, since we would also need to park and walk a little bit. I of course got up at 6 to make sure everything was ready and accounted for. My wife does not like to get up early. It took me attempting to wake her up 5 times before she eventually got up at 7:40, then wanted to make coffee, shower, and eat a bowl of cereal. Let's just say that we didn't leave the house until 9. It ended up being busier at the airport than normal, likely due to many colleges having Parents' Weekend, and it took so long to get through security that we missed our flight. Rightly so, the airline refused to refund our ticket. We were able to get new tickets, but not until the next day, and missed Friday afternoon and Saturday morning with our daughter. Jess was disappointed, to say the least. Fast forward to now. We were flying down for a long weekend to help her move. We take one flight from our town to a bigger town nearby, then fly from there to my daughter's college town. Again, it was a long morning of me pushing my wife, getting her to move along. Due to the last airport mishap, I wanted to make sure I told her we needed to leave extra early as to not miss the flight again. We got there on time with a bit of time to spare, and my wife was annoyed. Kept going on about how now we just have to sit and wait for 45 minutes for them to start boarding. We took our first flight and landed in the connecting city, at a much larger airport. We only had about 1 hour layover. We got off the plane at 9:15 and our next plane started boarding at 9:40. We had to take multiple rails to get from where we landed to our terminal. We got to our terminal and had about 15 minutes until our plane was set to board. My wife tells me that she wants to get coffee. There was a little market next to our terminal that sold hot food and coffee. I asked if she wanted me to go grab it for her. "No, I want Starbucks," she said. Well, Starbucks was a rail ride away, and a little bit of a walk. I told her we couldn't do that. We didn't have enough time. She stated that we had enough time, and if I wouldn't go with her, she would go by herself. I tried to discourage her, but she was determined. She walked away at a brisk pace for her, and said she would be back in time. 15 minutes went by and she was nowhere to be seen. They started calling boarding groups. I called my wife, hoping she was nearby. She didn't answer. They called a few groups, then called ours. In a panic, I called my wife again 3 times. Finally, on the last call, she answered and said she was on her way. It was a long line and she had to wait a bit. I told her they were almost done with boarding and she needed to hurry up. I waited by the gate, but the attendants said they would need to shut the gate in 2 minutes. I waited and waited, but she didn't show up. The attendant asked if I wanted to board, otherwise she was closing the gate. I tried to plead with her to wait a couple of minutes, but she insisted that she couldn't, so I boarded the plane. A few minutes later, my wife calls me saying that the attendant won't let her on. They had already removed the boarding ramp at that point. She told me I needed to tell them to let me off the plane to be with her, and I said no. It is not fair to do this again to Jess. I said, I told you we didn't have time, but you decided to go anyways. I told her to go purchase a new ticket for the next flight, and I would see her when she arrives. She got to Jess's school and seemed unbothered by the whole situation. Didn't even really talk about it. I thought maybe she realized it was her fault and just wanted to drop it. Boy, was I wrong. We are now home and she hasn't talked to me since the trip over a week ago and is insisting that I am an asshole. So, am I the asshole? Yeah, whether you consider what OP did was wrong kinda depends on how you look at it. Of course, one could argue that through thick and thin, you want to stay by your spouse's side, even if their time management is a hot mess. But at the same time, they already missed their previous flight just the day before, which couldn't be refunded and they had to pay for yet another ticket. And OP did try to warn her that she didn't have time at all to get coffee, but she just didn't listen. Also considering if OP did stay behind, that would have been the third non-refundable tickets that they would have to buy. So when they were boarding, OP was really just put on the spot and kind of had to make a tough decision right then and there. Stay behind and miss the flight yet again with your wife and have to pay for 2 more tickets, or just board the plane and hope that she makes it at the last second. Honestly, if I was in OP's situation, it's hard to say for sure unless I was actually there, but I probably would have ended up doing the same thing. I would definitely feel bad having to decide to do that, but I would also hope that she would come around to understand my point of view after the fact. Karen upset that she can't, quote, rob an ATM. Had a buddy who used to work with an armored cash transport service. If you don't know, there are various types of these services, but for the most part, they transport large sums of cash to and from banks and businesses. They generally are paid to safely and securely transfer funds, as well as carry a firearm on them for protection. Obvious reasons on why their vehicles may be a high-value target, so they take safety seriously and have protocols for protecting each other. This service in particular did ATM refills, as in they would go to ATMs, check their cash level, and refill if necessary. For important context reasons, he is a large dude, amateur boxing/MMA type, perfect for this line of work. No one wants to mess with them. One day he's doing an ATM refill at a gas station. He recalls the 70s-something lady coming through the door out of his peripheral vision. Why would he think anything of it? He's busy stocking cash into the machine, and while he's finishing up, he feels a poke in his back, and an older, gruff woman's voice say something to the tune of, "Give me all the cash in a bag. This is a stick-up." My friend said he thought he felt time freeze. He had been trained on these things, but everything goes so quickly. Adrenaline is pumping fast. He whips around fast, grabs the robber by the wrist to try and disarm, and does some sort of MMA-style throwdown to the ground. Only then he realized in his horror that this was an old woman. She looked like any other sweet old grandmother out there, and he had her wrist in his hand while she was on the floor, screaming bloody murder. He let go immediately. She's screaming for the police to get called, and he takes a step back and tries to take in the whole situation. The woman is helped up, but holding her wrist, and she immediately says what was going on as if she was in the right. "It was just a joke. My God, you can't take a joke? I'm just an old woman. I couldn't rob you. I just wanted to wait to use the machine." My friend said he was just collecting himself and felt his adrenaline coming down when he heard what she said, and immediately felt his blood rising and the adrenaline pumping back up. "Oh my f***ing God, are you serious? You cannot joke about that stuff, you f***ing moron. I'm a blank armored truck employee. Jesus Christ." The cops were called. The original call that sent them in was that an old woman had been assaulted in this gas station, so the police came in and were immediately looking for someone who hurt a sweet old lady. No one had really seen what happened because everyone was doing their own thing, but this lady is just telling everyone how she didn't do anything wrong and was brutally thrown to the ground by this huge brute. The lady is talking to police while holding onto her wrist and her head, crying while she talked to the police, and they question my friend. At this point, my friend is crapping his pants. He thinks he's going to get framed hard for this, and the police are just telling him that from her side of the story, she was assaulted by him. He calmly tells them his side of the story, and while he's talking, he realizes there's a security camera pointing directly at the ATM. He points to that and almost begs and pleads for the cops to check the cameras. They watch the camera footage, and while low quality and grainy, you see the lady clearly put a finger pointing gun style into his back, old school mock robbery style. The cops were dumbfounded on why they thought someone would think this was a joke. They go back to question her, and she brings up that it was just a joke. "I'm just an old woman though, how on earth could I rob anyone? You would think that someone could handle a little humor. Must just be these newer generations being too soft." My friend commented how she was just so blindly adamant that this was just a joke, and she was wronged for just a little horseplay as she called it. but he almost lost his mind when he heard her bring up the newer generations bit. An ambulance came and picked her up. She had a sprained wrist and some bruising on her back, and she claimed she needed physical therapy, which my friend's company legitimately believed she probably needed, as she was in her 70s and that throw to the ground was probably pretty rough. There ended up being no charges against my friend nor the lady, though an investigation was launched into it. I'd probably assume that they wouldn't want to pursue charges against an old woman who was judo thrown to the floor. Probably hard to make a convincing case to a jury out of that. She did, however, attempt to sue the armored truck service for the injuries, and they were considering settling, but apparently the owner was so upset about the interaction they decided to play it out in court. While I don't know all the details from that part, my friend did tell me that the case was dismissed, and they didn't owe her a dime. To this day, my friend said it was one of the scariest moments in his life, because at first he thought he was going to get robbed, and then shortly after it was scary because he thought he was going to go to jail for assault against an elderly woman. He thinks about how it could have played out differently depending on the person loading the ATM, and that the lady should be counting her lucky stars she didn't get killed that day. Thankfully, the friend is out of that job now, and doing different security work now where he says the threat of elderly women is next to none. As a side note, these cars generally always have shifts of 2 or more people per vehicle. His coworker was staying in the car that day and crapped his pants when all of a sudden he saw commotion inside and cops pulling up fast. He was even more surprised when he heard an old woman caused all this. Anyway, that's going to be all for today. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. Make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed and subscribe to the channel for more Reddit content. So I'm out of here, take care, and I'll see you next time.